Hello, and welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. Today we have a very, very special guest for the show today. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I am your host, Kimberly Cloud. Today I have a very, very special guest here for the show today. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Kimberly. My name is David E. Feldman, and I'm calling you from Long Beach, New York, which is just east of New York City.
Thank you. And can you tell me extensively about your past leading up into your present, and then we'll talk about good highlights?
Sure. Absolutely. So I was born in Brooklyn. My family is originally from Brooklyn. My dad had polio when he was a child and had to overcome not having the use of his legs. For the most part, his left leg, he couldn't use at all. His right leg, he could use a little bit. He overcame that by becoming a musician and his love of music and his love of my mom. And I have overcome a lot of my own challenges, and he was something of an inspiration for that. I've had, I've had addiction issues, depression. I've overcome cancer. I've had a whole bunch.
What kind of cancer did you have? I'm sorry.
Prostate cancer.
I'm sorry to hear that. That's very a powerful type thing, because it's a lot. I know Biden, former President Biden had it or has it.
I think he has it. Yeah.
Yeah. How did your father, and I'm sorry to hear that. So how did your father, leg being broken, how did that influence and impact your family to bring your family closer so that y'all can get over the hurdle? Because obviously he played music.
He did. He was a jazz musician, and eventually he became a teacher, a music teacher, and he taught school in Queens. But he couldn't do a lot of the things many people can do, or most able-bodied people can do, and yet he figured out ways to get past that and to make up for those deficiencies. He couldn't play ball with me. He couldn't run, but he could bat a ball, and I would go chase the ball and bring it back. So he mowed the lawn. He painted the house. He couldn't climb a ladder a normal way, but he could climb a ladder mostly using his hands, because he was on, those braces, those heavy metal braces that people have on their legs when they're severely handicapped. He had those. And so he had a lot of upper body strength because he carried himself around on crutches and on braces when he was growing up. So he overcame a lot, and society was not as kind then when he was growing up, or even when I was growing up, as they are now towards people who were handicapped. They didn't talk about people being physically challenged or disabled or handicapped. They talked about, well, what's up with your dad who's a cripple? They weren't so nice about it, so I had to deal with that. We all have things.
Did you have to advocate for your dad and your family so that y'all can be on the spectrum where people understand that just because of his disability doesn't make him a cripple or an individual that is labeled, but someone who superseded his expectations as someone who was labeled as disabled?
Yeah, I defended him to my friends, to the people I knew who would speak, who would say not nice things or unkind things about him. I did. And his influence also really helped me later on when I had my own challenges and my own difficulties. I think I drew on having seen him overcome challenges when it came time for me to deal with having cancer or dealing with addiction or depression. Or I had a lot of surgeries. I have 2 hip replacements. I've had intestinal surgery and spine surgery. I've had a lot of stuff.
Let's start with the beginning. Tell me about your addiction. What were you addicted to, and how did you overcome it?
So as a teenager, even a pre-teenager, I think I had a lot of trouble dealing with reality, dealing with life on life's terms. And what I did was I found my parents' liquor cabinet, and then I found my mother's medicine cabinet. And back then, this is the 1960s and the early 1970s, a lot of people took pills to cope with life. The mommy's little helper. And that's a little pill to calm you down when life gets too stressful. So
did you learn by watching your I don't know if your mother was taking pills, but you went to the medicine cabinet to grab the pills. Did you learn of the effects of drugs based on how your mother looked when she was under the influence? Or
no.
did you just say, guess what? I know these pills cause this. I want to try it.
Yeah, she wasn't really under the influence. She would take a little something, just like people would take a drink to calm down late in the day or when they were stressed. I don't think she was a drug addict or anything like that. But this stuff was around the house. Really, where I learned about this stuff was from my friends. There were other kids like me, and we were all finding the same kinds of things around our houses. And we would meet up late at night. We'd sneak out of our houses. And then when I was in high school, when I was going to high school, which I didn't go very often, eventually I stopped going. But we would meet up, get together, and get high. That's what we did. And a lot of kids, they got over that and they stopped doing it, but I didn't. And I got to where I needed to be high all the time. And that's what I did from, I would say, around 1970, 20 years, till the early 90s. And that's what I was doing. I was high pretty much the whole time.
Do you feel like do you still have the same friends that you got high with, by the way? Because some people do. Some people do.
No, I don't.
Okay.
Let me tell you what happened, if I can, Kimberly.
Yeah, go ahead.
What happened was, to just flash forward, I used a lot of drugs for a lot of years. And eventually what happened is I met this wonderful woman at a wedding in 1985. And I thought this woman was just a beautiful woman. She was a bridesmaid at a wedding. And I had had a few drinks, so I had the courage to ask her to dance with me. And I danced with her. And I said, "What a pretty locket that you have around your neck." It was a heart-shaped locket. It was gold. I said, "Where'd you get that?" She said, "I got it from my grandmother." And my grandmother was the love of my life. So I started talking about my grandmother, and she liked that. So I said, at the time, I was working in New York City. This is in 1985. And I said, "Do you ever get to New York City?" And she said, "No, but I would if I had a reason." And that went right over my head. And I said, "Oh, what a shame." And but eventually I did ask her out. And I've been married to that woman for 38 years now. Okay. And we've been together for 40 years because that was in 1985. And what happened was, even that time, I was still using drugs, right? And in 1989, she had a sister, and her sister had a baby in 1989. And after she had the baby, she passed away. And she
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. She had an aneurysm and she passed away. And my wife, Ellen, and I looked at each other and we said, "You know what? Life is too short. Let's have kids." Still, I'm using drugs at this point, right? And we had our first son in 1990. Okay. So here I am. I'm so proud to be a father. And yet I had a lot of issues with my father. We had a lot of tension and we had a lot of fighting, and I caused a lot of problems in my house because I was using drugs and I was in trouble a lot. And yet I'm so proud to be a father. So what happened was, one day in 1991, I'm taking care of my son and I'm high, and he got hurt, and it was over. Let me tell you, it was over. And I became absolutely willing to do absolutely anything to change. We call that the gift of desperation. Notice the gift of desperation, G-O-D, gift of desperation. And that is how I became willing to change. And I found myself in a program soon after that for people who want to stop using drugs, because it was when my son got hurt that I became willing to do anything to stop. And I did.
What
Eventually.
what did you learn from the experience of your battle with addiction?
I learned a lot of different things. One thing I learned was that led to me coming to believe in God. And I'm a big supporter of God now. I come from a family that's not religious. No one in my family believes in God besides me. I mean, in my current family, my wife does. I'm married to a scientist. My wife is a scientist who says science is proof of God. Look around. You think there's no God? Look around. That's what she says, and I'm with her, you know. So I lead a very spiritually centered life, and that shows up in my books. That led to me becoming a writer. I believe that was God's plan for me, was to become a writer and to have that be part of the backbone of the things I write about.
Tell me about your cancer battle and how you overcame it.
Sure. I had First I had a hip replacement, and I was going to have a second hip replacement. And in the run up, you have to do a lot of tests. So in the run up to my second hip replacement, and by the way, I've had a lot of health issues, but the way I choose to look at it is I've had absolutely terrific doctors. So I'm very blessed in that way. So what happened was I was being tested for my hip replacement, and they said, well, gee, your PSA, which is a blood count,
Mm.
kind of high. So we need to do some checking up on this. And ultimately what they found out was that I had prostate cancer and I had to have radiation. And I was pretty freaked out about that at the beginning. And I went to Sloan Kettering in New York City, one of the world's great cancer hospitals. And I'm okay.
What kind of drugs did they put you on? It was just strictly regular third or first generation radioactive drugs, or however it is.
No. What I was given was radiation.
Radiation.
They didn't give me any drugs. What they did was they put these radioactive seeds in there in my prostate. And those kill the cancer. They do put you at risk for other kinds of cancer, but that's a risk that I had to take because the main thing was to kill the cancer.
And how did what did you go through during this process, and how did your family once again overcome that and grow closer?
Well, my family is very supportive. You know, I'm the father of two fine men. My son, Michael, the one who got hurt while I was high, he's 30, he's 30, I was going to say 34. He's 35, and he just got married about a month ago.
Congratulations.
And thank you so much. And my younger son, Dan, is with a young lady from Colombia, and they're very happy, and they're very supportive of me, and I'm very supportive of them. And we became closer as a family. And my wife always has my back. I'm married to the best girl on the planet. I'm very blessed.
Throughout the challenges that had came, name one thing that you can remember that you would like to share with your wife on camera right now that y'all had that was a not a sexually intimate moment, but an intimate moment that made you grow closer to her.
Well, I'll tell you what. In recovery, what we do in recovery from drug addiction, we become accountable for our behavior and our mistakes. And one of the things that we do is we make amends for when we hurt people. And I was in that process of making amends, and my wife came to me and said, I understand you're doing this amends process. Where am I on that list? And I said, wait, what? And I said, what are you talking about? And she told me about when our first son, Michael, was a baby. He was colicky and he didn't sleep. And he went months with sleeping almost not at all. And she said, you know, when he didn't sleep, you used to wake up and scream at me that this child is get him quiet him down. And I was unkind. Well, she told me this, And I started crying because I hurt her. She said that was like a knife in my heart. But I have to tell you, it's a terrific thing that she told me that, because it helped me to understand that I hurt her. And the last thing I ever want to do is hurt her, you know, and I changed. And that was a long time ago, you know, that she told me that.
That
But
leads me to my next question. From
sure,
the beginning of your relationship, you know, you don't have to tell me how exactly you changed, but how have you evolved, you know, in a way where you've learned from your mistakes and you can grow further with your wife? How have you learned from that? Because it's a process.
sure. Well, first of all, I'm far from perfect. I still make plenty of mistakes. But when I make mistakes, I'm usually aware of them. And I'm pretty quick to say, you know what? I messed up. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry. I can see when I hurt people. Let me tell you a quick story. It's not about my wife, but it's about my brother. When we were growing up, I hurt my brother. I was unkind to my brother. We had a lot of conflict in the house, and I was hurt by the conflict. And I didn't really see that it hurt other people. I just felt like I was hurt, and I felt life was unfair, and so forth and so on. And I was unkind to my brother. So many, many years later, again, I was going through this amends process, and my brother and I were fighting, and we were on the phone. He lives in Atlanta, and I live in New York, and we were fighting on the phone. And I said to him, Matthew, and he said, what? And I said, I love you. And he said, oh, yeah, what? And I said, I love you. And he said, David, I never heard you say that. And I said, well, it's about time. This was 20 years ago. I'm 68 now. I was 48 then. And I said, I love you. And he said, I never heard you say that. I said, well, it's about time. And since then, every time we speak, we say, I love you. And I have to say, I don't know that we loved each other back then. But since then, saying it has planted the seed and watered the seed and shown sunlight on the seed. And I have to tell you, now my brother and I, we really do love each other. We really do. He was at my son's wedding last month, and it was wonderful to see him and his wife there.
That leads me to my next question. What is the cheat code for family? Like what do you do to keep a happy, stable family? What do you do on a regular, Mr. Feldman?
What do I do? Well, we speak to each other all the time. I tell my wife, first of all, you know, when I say I love my wife, people say, well, I hope you tell her that. I tell her that all the time. And I tell her she's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And you know what? She is. And it's not about looking like you're on the cover of Cosmo. It's like she's in my heart. She's in my heart. And one of the things I do is I thank God for her. I think a big part of the happiness in life is wanting what you have. I used to have a friend who would say, it's not about having what you want, it's about wanting what you have. And it's about, I have this great girl in my life, and I'm very grateful that I have her. And seeing it that way, seeing how much I have and how rich I am. I don't have a ton of money, but I'm a rich man because I have love in my life. I have these two fine young men for sons. And you know what? I can walk and I can see and I can hear, and I got food in my refrigerator. I got $1 or $2 in the bank. I got electricity. I got running water. I got a toilet that works. It's not bad. It's not bad.
How does it feel to be father of the year or of the decades, knowing that you raised two fine young men? How do you feel? Do you feel fulfilled in your life knowing that you actually raised two seeds to follow your footsteps?
I am not father of the year. I am not. I am no such thing. So, and I think a big part of why my sons are so wonderful is their mother. Their mother is absolutely magnificent. I've done some things right, And a lot of it is that I did a lot wrong, and I got into some programs that helped me to turn my life around and, get off of drugs, start, looking to God for answers and looking to other people for support, and I became a better man. But I don't think, and you know what? Some of it is luck. There are people who are very good people, and who do everything right. And they have kids who might be criminals. It's not all down to, what kind of guy I am.
Exactly.
I think I was very lucky also that my children, look, I don't think my father did anything wrong. And I was in a lot of trouble for a lot of my life. My mother ripped the shirt off my back and she was looking for track marks in my arms, which I didn't have. I had a tattoo, but I didn't have track marks in my arms.
Tell me about, well said, by the way, I get what you're saying. Tell me about your book, what you want to highlight and why the people should buy it, what's it about, and read an excerpt from one of your books.
Well, let me tell you what. So what I have written is 2 mystery series, a 6-book Dora Ellison mystery series about a woman who she doesn't like bullies. She doesn't like people who abuse people. And she's very nice and she's very kind and she's very sweet. But when she runs into people who are abusing others or who are taking advantage of people who are weaker than they are, she does something about it. And she eventually will run into people in every book who are killers. And she does something about them too. And she discovers that she is a savant. She has an affinity and an ability, a natural ability for martial arts. I also wrote, and that's a 6-book series, the Dora Ellison Mystery Series. I don't have an excerpt in front of me, but what I would like to do is to tell you that I also wrote a 4-book series called the Hammer and Sharpe Mystery Thrillers, which are about a Jewish crime boss, right, who has a heart, who he sells heroin, he runs prostitution, he runs a gambling casino, and yet he helps the little old ladies in his neighborhood. He helps people who are struggling in his neighborhood. He says, listen, there's going to be crime. There's people who want to shoot heroin. I might as well supply it. And I'm not going to give him fentanyl instead of the heroin. He's not a perfect guy. He's got a lot wrong with him. But he also cares about the people in his neighborhood. So he's not black. He's not white in terms of good and bad. He is kind of in between.
Do these books have like any influence of your life or similarities with your life? And tell me how.
Yeah, well, the other person in the Hammer and Sharpe mystery, Judah Hammer is this Jewish crime boss. The other person in that book, the Hammer and Sharpe, is Sharpe, a guy named Sam Sharpe, and he's a private investigator who solves crimes, but he's also a heroin addict who's struggling to get clean from heroin. And anytime he's involved in trying to solve a crime, the heroin addiction wakes up. And he starts to want heroin. When he's trying to solve a crime, he gets really into it. He gets very focused and he's very intense, and he's working on solving that crime. And the addiction starts to work on him like a beast in his heart, trying to take over his life. And that struggle comes from my struggle. That's what I write about it because I know about it.
Okay. And where do you see yourself going with these books for the future, and how do you want them to incorporate? How do you want my audience to incorporate your books by possibly purchasing them, and why should they?
Well, I think they'll find them fun books and interesting. A lot of the issues of the day, whether it's political corruption or gender issues or racism and bigotry, these issues are in the backdrop of my books. They show up in the books. If you look at the pages of the news and on the news media, you're going to see this stuff. We got all kinds of crazy things happening now in politics. That stuff shows up in my books because when it's happening, that's when I'm writing. And whatever's going on, Listen, you squeeze an orange and you get orange juice. You squeeze me and you get art that reflects what's going on at the time. And so the issues of the day show up in my books, but they're also fun and they're also entertaining. And you'll have people you hate to love and people you love to hate in these books. And I think your audience will find them fun and well written and interesting. And by the way, where you can find them is at any bookstore, Amazon, anywhere, but also at davidefeldman.com, which is my website. And I offer discounts there.
Based on your prior addictions, how do you feel like the audience, how do you feel you overcame your addictions? And we're going to leave it there. And
Okay.
where did you grow?
Yeah, where I overcame my addictions is that there was something in my life that I had to love more than the drugs. And that was my son, my firstborn son. And when he got hurt because I was high, it was over. And I became willing to do anything. I had found something that was more important than the drugs. And that was my son. And it's because of him that I got clean, because of my love for him.
Well, I kind of like, can you talk to your family and tell them how you feel about, just shout out your family if you want, and tell them why you do the things that you do, such as write books, maybe it's so you can keep a cohesive family and grow your family, maybe a time capsule. I don't know, but you can speak now.
Well, I don't know either, but I will tell you. If I was talking to them right now and looking at them right here, right now, I would say to my sweet bride, Ellen, I adore you. You know that because I tell you that every night. She just says, I just love you. And I just say, you're the most beautiful girl in the world. And my sons, Michael and Daniel, they're the best men on the planet, and I don't know who's the father and who's the son sometimes, but I adore them too. And I am there for them forever. They know I have their back. My whole family, I have their back. And I think that's what's really important.
You got that deep New York accent. How can the people reach you, David?
They can reach me at davidefeldman.com, or they could find me on social media. Any social media, you look up David E. Feldman, author, and you'll find me. And I love talking to people. So, I have a lot of people on my email list. I respond to questions. People ask me, oh, one thing I forgot. I have a dog named Boo, who is the love of my life. And he's the love of my wife said, I'll never have a dog. I'm a cat person. Well, that dog, we did get a dog. She said to me, you want a dog? Who's walking him at 6 a.m.? And I said, I will. And I walk him in every day, 5 days a week. She walks him on the weekends at 6:30, and then I go back to sleep. And that dog sleeps pressed against her face. This woman who said, I'll never have a dog, well, she adores that dog. So I have to give a shout out to my dog, Boo Bear, who is just the best.
Anything else you would like to add?
I would like to add, thank you, Kimberly, for being so patient with me with my technical glitches. I have these senior moments that are taking over my life. So thank you so much for your patience and for your willingness to have me on your show. I'm very grateful.
You're very welcome. Stay on the line. Thank you guys for joining my show today. Take care, be safe, and I'll see you guys another time. Bye.